Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here. You guys know what time it is. Time to talk about current events in the online fitness community. And I've had a number of people ask me when I made the announcement the other day that Eric Kanevsky lost his bodybuilding show. They're like, Jason, if you know so much about training, couldn't you just train him for a contest prep? If you know so much, why don't you offer to coach him? Why don't you coach him? That's a good question. But up front, people love my imitation, so let's see if we can go ahead and get Eric Kanevsky's stance on the matter. Hey everybody, it's Eric Kanevsky here with Eric Kanevsky's Fitness. I'm 23 years old and I look like I'm 45 now from my gear abuse. The most optimal aging in history. Alright guys, let me go ahead and put on my +5 head of speechcraft and let's talk about this. So, why wouldn't I coach Eric? Well, first of all, I'm not a bodybuilding prep coach. And yeah, I will probably get into coaching again later, do some online coaching and stuff. I don't have a current plan for it, but a lot of people ask. I'll probably do it at some point again. Probably have to have some sort of criteria, though, for gauging clients and stuff like that, and an entry process. Basically, I would have to charge people just to do an introduction, like basically an assessment, just because I'm going to have a lot of people waste my time with nonsense, a lot of trolls, stuff like that. So it's something I would have to put a game plan towards. But here's the problem I would have with someone like Eric. I know enough of Eric's history. I know enough of his training. I know enough of his gear abuse history. I don't think I'd be able to help him. Meaning, what have I said in the past that a lot of serious bodybuilders can't actually train? This is a point I've made, and it's a lot of people will try to imitate what they do, and then you look at it and people say, well, they're not really doing what you would call training, yet they're jacked. And it's like, yeah, and they can't train. And there are exceptions to the rule, but it's usually the bodybuilders who have an actual strength background of some type, real training background of some type, before they started abusing copious amounts of anabolics. That makes a big difference. And if you take someone like Eric, the problem is I wouldn't necessarily be able to train him safely. So I don't know what I would be able to do with someone like that. And the reasons for that are multifold in nature. Number one, we could talk about leg training. We could talk about squats. We could talk about these things. But he's developed serious muscle imbalances. He's probably has a weak core, things like that. It might be hard to get him under a barbell at this point. And here's what you have to think about. What have we talked about with a lot of these guys having weak connective tissue? Because of their drug combinations. And when we say that, people need to understand, I'm not going to go into all the specifics of it, but the sort of substances that people use and the stacks they use and everything else affects this tremendously. It's a very complex topic. It's not that everyone who abuses anabolics is by default going to have brittle connective tissue. People need to understand that difference. What they use and the combinations they use and how different things balance out affects that. It's not just an automatic thing. So that's a point that needs to be brought up. But you take someone like Eric, I don't get the impression, just looking at Eric, that he's used significant amounts of HGH and stuff like that. I don't get the impression that he's used anything that would strengthen his connective tissue just at first glance for the most part. When I see someone like Eric, I think large amounts of test, maybe a bunch of tren, right? That's what I think. Maybe some orals in there. Just using very large amounts of these things. And the problem we have is that he's abused stuff like that and has probably done nothing for his connective tissue. He's really weak on a lot of big exercises. And what happened a while back, he said he tried to bench heavy and he felt like he pulled a tendon in his pec. I think it was a minor tear. So he's had an issue just trying to bench press before. How do you train someone like that? How do you train someone who has weak connective tissue? Because they never built a base, and he immediately went on like 3 grams of gear as a teenager. He was still in high school. And, so that came up in my comments, too. Someone said, you've said that you never offered proof, and he denies it. I've linked screenshots before. And it's not just me that has the screenshots. Other people have this stuff, other coaches out there. There's a lot of people who saw all the stuff that he talked about back in the day. He can deny it all he wants, but we all know it's true. Those who are in the know it's true. I've linked evidence before. It just is what it is. I know it for a fact. And so if you were to ask me, could I coach someone like that? Look, I know this for a fact. I know it for a fact because I remember it firsthand. I saw it. So you have someone who never built a base of any type. He was like a 160-pound skinny kid going on 2-3 grams of gear. okay, as a teenager, still in high school, like 17 years old. He never properly developed his connective tissue. He's never properly built a base of any type. Now he has big muscles. You're taking something like that, and it's very hard to train someone in that situation. It would be a very, very difficult in a lot of ways. Like you would almost be better off trying to coach a 60-year-old grandmother who's never got under a barbell before. You're actually less likely to hurt her, because your problem we run into is that he actually needs a certain amount of stimulus to get growth or anything. Well, the problem is too much stimulus of the wrong type would injure him. So you can't use a lot of traditional training methods. You would have to find ways to work around his possible connective tissue risk of injury. So you've got all of that, right? That's already a factor. Then you take someone like him who, again, it's very obvious, and something that when he was putting up pictures and stuff on social media back when he was prepping for this show, you could really see all the side enhancement coming out. He's got a lot of oil in his biceps and delts, a lot. So we kind of get back over to the point of how do you train someone who's using that much side enhancement in those small muscles? I mean, how's that going to affect your ability to get proper mobility, range of motion on different exercises? I mean, let's talk about the fact of pulling muscles. Why does he need to do partials on all these lat pull downs and everything else? Probably because his biceps, because his delts, things like that, are struggling to keep pace in terms of range of motion with his back, right? So because he's got all this oil in those muscles, they don't contract appropriately. They don't contract appropriately. And that might be fine when you put them on a concentration curl, that he might be doing partials and stuff also, to where they just have to work by themselves, maybe, you know, in one of these preacher curl machines or whatever he does. But you put them into a compound movement, a multi-joint exercise, and what happens? All right, you have something like that that's a possible weak chain. It's hard for him to train him through the full range of motion, because the stretch and pull, when it hits all of that swelling and scar tissue and encapsulated oil, it can be a problem for leverages. It can be a problem for his kinetic chain. So it really limits a lot of what he can do in certain ways. So you take someone like that, and that's why you see him and Brandy doing all these partials for their upper body. Because, like the problem you have with many bodybuilders, there's an issue of pain from all the actual PIP from the injections. And you have the issue of mobility maybe being affected, strength being affected in those muscles where they're putting all this site enhancement. And it can really affect performance. And it should. I mean, if you think about it, if you think about the fact that maybe there's, you know, half a cup of scar tissue and encapsulated oil in a deltoid or a bicep, and you think about the way muscles work, it can interfere with the way that muscle moves. And so, I mean, you're dealing with stuff like this, and it's hard to train someone who's put themselves through this stuff. And I'm not saying it's impossible, and that's one reason you see a lot of coaches who specialize in training these bodybuilders, right? Because they know they're doing all this stuff. They're used to working with guys who have a bunch of oil in their rear delt and side delt and bicep and lateral head of their tricep and whatever else. They're used to this. They know how to work around it, because all the guys they work with do this. You know, they've got a lot of experience with it, and they know how to go ahead and get them a pump and get some fatigue and everything while working around these limitations that could affect their kinetic chain, could affect their movement patterns, could affect their range of motion. It's normal for these coaches, but someone who's not used to working with them on that is going to struggle with that. And that's what people need to realize. A lot of these pro bodybuilders you see, they're using a lot of this continual tension, not because it works, as it doesn't work. It's actually less effective for the most part. But they need to get all this metabolic fatigue, which works really well with drugs. But the problem is, of course, a lot of times they're working around scar tissue and all the muscles they're injecting. They're working around the pain in their injection sites, right? They're working around the pain because most bodybuilders, overwhelming amount of bodybuilders, site shoot. And if you guys remember, even Dave Crossland said that when he did that big interview, when he was doing all this stuff and was doing it on camera, that every bodybuilder he knows does that. They all site. That's the norm. That's industry-wide standard. That's normal, including even guys who compete in natural shows. I mean, we kind of pointed that out with Doug Miller, right? We could see all the matching injection marks on each side of his body. They were in identical spots. Once he got lean enough where you could see them, is a natural. So you know all the enhanced guys do it, as if there's a difference to a certain extent. So that's a problem you run into, is that you take someone like Eric, who's never built a base, Probably doesn't use the most he uses cost-effective stuff, but he probably doesn't use the most high-quality stuff you could get. He's going to put himself in a situation where he probably has compromised connective tissue. He's going to have compromised muscle function, compromised range of motion. You just really can't train someone who's in that circumstance that he's in, especially having just started all that nonsense as early as he did. He's so compromised in certain ways that for someone to even coach him at this point, he probably needs to go to a specialized trainer who works specifically with heavily enhanced pre-contest bodybuilders. And the bad part is, the ironic part is that he doesn't even have the genetics to pull it off. So it's not going to matter, even if he did get the right coach and they did put him on all the right stuff, he just doesn't have the genetics to compete in what he's trying to compete in. This is all just fun for him and a show, and it's a good way to make money off YouTube, because YouTube is way more profitable than bodybuilding is. Like, keep that in mind, guys. As a YouTuber, you will make way more money than you're ever going to make trying to get a pro card as a bodybuilder. Just be realistic about that. So it's a business for him, but he's not going to be capable of winning. And at the end of the day, you know, people ask me, why wouldn't you train? Well, I don't have the actual skill set to train someone like that. That is so far outside of my realm that I wouldn't even know where to begin. Again, he's messed himself up so much in so many ways with all the stuff he's put into his body that it would be problematic to actually train him. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.